A racist passenger harasses a black man on a plane and is stunned to discover who he really is. Elias Moore stepped onto Flight 472 bound for San Francisco, scanning the row numbers as a low hum of conversation filled the cabin. Overhead bins slammed shut, the scent of brewed coffee drifted from the front galley, and passengers shuffled in the narrow aisle, jostling for space. He moved past a man wrestling a suitcase into an overhead compartment, murmuring a polite, "Excuse me," before sliding toward his seat by the window mid-cabin. His dark jacket brushed against worn jeans, and a small, weathered carry-on bag hung from one hand. A few rows ahead, Patricia Lane lowered her phone and watched him over the rim of her designer scarf. She had noticed in the moment he boarded, the way he kept his bag close, the quiet, measured steps, the faint look of thought in his eyes. To her, it wasn't calmness she saw. It was something else, something she didn't trust. Patricia adjusted her cardigan and lifted her hand slightly as a flight attendant passed. "Yes, ma'am," the attendant Marissa asked with a warm smile. Patricia tilted her head toward Elias, lowering her voice. "Is it safe to have someone like him sitting by the emergency exit?" Marissa's smile held. "All passengers have cleared security, and emergency exit seats are assigned according to safety protocols, ma'am." Patricia gave a light, uneasy laugh. "Of course. I just think, well, with everything on the news these days, you can never be too careful." "If there's something specific you're concerned about, let me know," Marissa replied, still smiling but with eyes that had cooled ever so slightly. "We want all our passengers to feel safe." As Marissa moved down the aisle, Elias sat and clicked his seatbelt. From his bag, he pulled out a small, clear prescription bottle, checked the label, then tucked it away. He took a deep breath, opened a paperback novel, and let the noise of boarding fade behind the printed words. Patricia, however, was watching every move. Medication or something else? She wondered. She didn't like the way he kept his bag close, the way his fingers brushed the zipper now and then as though making sure it stayed closed. In her mind, she was already connecting dots no one else saw. The seatbelt sign was still on, but passengers were already shifting into flight mode, settling bags, leaning toward windows, tugging on jackets for warmth. The engine's deep hum filled the cabin, blending with the occasional thunk of overhead bins closing. Patricia sat stiffly in her seat, her eyes cutting once more to 14A. Elias was reading, utterly at ease. To her, that ease felt rehearsed. She pressed the call button. Marissa appeared quickly, leaning slightly so they could speak without attracting attention. "Yes, ma'am." Patricia lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I've been watching him. He keeps checking his bag, like he's afraid someone will see what's inside. Doesn't that seem suspicious to you?" Marissa's tone stayed calm. "Many passengers keep personal items close, especially medication. Unless there's a clear cause for concern, we cannot search a passenger's belongings." Patricia gave a tight smile. "So you'll wait until something happens?" "Ma'am, I assure you, the crew is trained to handle any situation," Marissa replied. "If you see or hear anything unusual beyond that, please let me know." Patricia watched her leave, irritation flaring. She glanced at the man in 13B, leaning over slightly. "Do you notice the guy in the exit row? Doesn't he seem off?" The man followed her gaze, saw Elias flipping a page in his book, and shrugged. "Looks fine to me." Patricia leaned back, her jaw tightening. "People always say that until they regret it." Across the aisle in 12D, a young woman with earbuds noticed the exchange. She watched Patricia's expression, sharp, assessing, then followed her gaze to Elias. The man seemed entirely absorbed in his reading, the picture of a peaceful traveler. Still, the woman caught herself glancing back twice. Patricia's suspicion was contagious. She pressed the call button again. This time Adam, another flight attendant, approached. "Ma'am, can I help you?" "Yes," Patricia said quietly but urgently. "I think the man in 14A is hiding something in his bag. He's been checking it over and over. This is an emergency exit row. If he tries anything, it could be dangerous." Adam nodded politely. "We'll keep an eye on him. But I want to remind you that every passenger went through security before boarding. That doesn't mean anything, Patricia said sharply. You've seen the news. People slip through all the time. Adam's smile didn't falter, but his eyes softened just a fraction. The way you do when someone's mind is locked around fear. Understood, ma'am. If you notice anything new, let us know immediately. Patricia sat back, unsatisfied, her gaze locked on Elias again. She decided, if no one else was going to act, she would. Elias, oblivious of the attention, sipped water and turned another page. The hum of the plane steadied into cruise mode, but Patricia's pulse was already climbing. Patricia Lane had been watching Elias more for the better part of 20 minutes. Every time he reached for his bag, every time his eyes flicked down toward it, she made a mental note. To her, it wasn't absent-minded. It was deliberate, controlled. Her fingertips tapped against the armrest, a restless beat. She imagined headlines, thought about interviews she'd seen on TV where people said, "We all thought he was normal until..." Her breathing was shallow. And then Elias reached down again. He unzipped the bag just 2 inches, glanced inside, then zipped it closed. Patricia's pulse jumped. Without thinking, she unbuckled her seatbelt. Marissa spotted the motion from the aisle. "Ma'am, the seatbelt sign is still on. Please remain seated." "I need to move," Patricia said, standing now, leaning into the aisle. "I can't sit here. Not with him sitting there like that." She didn't shout, but her voice carried just enough for nearby passengers to glance up. Elias lifted his head from his book, looking mildly confused but not defensive. Marissa stepped between them. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," Patricia said, pointing toward Elias. "He's hiding something in that bag. I've been watching him. I want you to open it." Elias spoke for the first time, his voice even and measured. "Ma'am, there's nothing in my bag that concerns you." "That's what they all say." Patricia shot back. "Prove it. Open it." Adam had moved up from the rear galley now, his presence quiet but firm. "Ma'am, please return to your seat. We don't search passengers' belongings without cause." "Cause? I am the cause. I'm telling you he's acting suspicious." The murmur of the cabin began to grow. A man 2 rows back leaned into the aisle, trying to see. A woman across from Elias pulled her coat tighter, as if bracing for something. Elias sat still, his hands resting on the book in his lap. "You're making a mistake," he said, his tone steady. "No, I'm preventing one," Patricia replied. Adam stepped forward. "Ma'am, I'm asking you one more time to sit down. If you continue to disrupt the flight, I'll have to inform the captain." Patricia didn't move. Her eyes were locked on Elias. "You're all blind. You'll regret this when it's too late." The silence stretched, thick and uneasy. Finally, with a sharp exhale, Patricia dropped into her seat, buckling the belt in a single angry motion. But her gaze never left Elias. And Elias, feeling the weight of that stare, turned back to his book, though now he wasn't reading. The hum of the engines filled the space between rows. But for Elias Moore, it wasn't just white noise anymore. It was the sound of the cabin holding its breath. He could feel it, even without looking up from the page. He knew more eyes were on him now than before Patricia's outburst. He'd been in enough tense rooms to recognize when the atmosphere had shifted. Patricia sat 2 rows ahead, stiff-backed, her hands gripping the edges of her armrests. She leaned slightly toward the aisle, giving herself a better angle to glance at him every few seconds. Marissa made a slow pass down the aisle, her posture relaxed, but her eyes flicked between the 2. When she stopped beside Elias's row, her voice dropped to a private register. "Can I bring you anything? Water, coffee?" Elias shook his head. "I'm fine. Thank you." She offered a small nod that seemed to carry more than politeness, an acknowledgement that she saw the situation for what it was, even if she couldn't step into it directly. At the rear galley, Adam was jotting notes onto an incident form. He logged the time of Patricia's initial complaint, her second complaint, and the brief confrontation that had drawn other passengers' attention. Company policy meant he had to record every detail. But policies didn't have a box for the way tension lingers after someone's accused in public. From across the aisle, a college-age passenger, Rowan, seat 14C, had started to study the dynamic himself. He'd been half listening to a podcast, but the way Patricia watched Elias was unsettling in a different way. Her focus wasn't casual. It was targeted, unwavering. Patricia noticed him watching her watch Elias and gave a small, knowing shake of her head, as if to say, "You'll understand later." Rowan didn't answer, just slipped one earbud back in, though the music wasn't on anymore. Marissa reached the rear galley and spoke low to Adam. She's still keyed up. "I don't think this is going away." Adam glanced toward Patricia's row. "If she gets up again, I'll have to call the cockpit. We can't have her confronting him mid-flight." Marissa exhaled. "It's not the first time I've seen something like this." She's convinced herself she's right, and that makes her unpredictable. In 14A, Elias placed his book in the seat pocket, sat back, and let his eyes drift to the window. Outside, the world was a quilt of clouds, serene and distant. Inside, the air felt tighter than it should. He'd been in worse situations, rooms where suspicion wasn't spoken but could be felt in every movement. But this was different. Here, there was no door to walk out of, no way to leave the room until it landed. And Patricia, she wasn't done. The seatbelt sign was still on, not because of turbulence. There hadn't been any, but because Captain Reed in the cockpit had been alerted that there was a developing passenger concern in the cabin. Adam and Marissa had agreed to keep passengers seated for now, hoping to prevent Patricia Lane from finding another reason to march down the aisle. But it didn't work. Patricia's patience was wearing thin, and every time Elias's hand went anywhere near his bag, it was like striking a match against her nerves. She waited until Marissa had moved a few rows forward with a drinks tray before unbuckling. The click of the seatbelt release sounded louder than it should have. Rowan in 14C noticed first. He pulled out one earbud. Ma'am, they asked us to keep our belts on." Patricia brushed past him without answering, stepping into the aisle with controlled urgency, the kind that draws attention without seeming chaotic. In 2 strides, she was at Elias's row. "I've had enough of this," she said, voice clear and loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "Open the bag." Elias turned his head slowly, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, there's nothing in my bag that concerns you." "Then prove it, right now, or I'll make sure everyone knows you're hiding something." Passengers turned. A woman across the aisle put her hand to her mouth. A man in the row behind Elias leaned forward, eyes darting between them. From the front, Marissa's voice cut through. "Ms. Lane, please return to your seat." "No." Patricia snapped. "You're not listening. He's been acting suspicious since we boarded. He keeps checking that bag like it's rigged to do something. I'm not going to sit here and let this plane be in danger." Adam was moving quickly down the aisle from back, his voice firm. "Ma'am, this is not the way to handle a concern. You are creating a disturbance." "I'm creating a disturbance?" Patricia barked out a short laugh. "He's the one creating the danger. I'm trying to keep everyone safe." By now, the murmuring was spreading, a low ripple through the rows. Some passengers looked toward Elias with uncertainty. Others glared at Patricia, as if she'd ruined the quiet. Elias's voice stayed calm, even as his jaw tightened. "I'm just trying to read my book and make it to my destination like everyone else." "Liar," Patricia said flatly. Marissa had reached them now, planting herself between the two. "Ms. Lane, I am instructing you to return to your seat immediately. If you refuse, the captain will be informed and law enforcement will meet this flight on arrival." The words law enforcement had their intended effect, not on Patricia, but on the crowd. Heads turned sharply. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" Patricia's gaze flicked around, searching for support. "You all saw him. You know I'm right." Rowan shook his head slowly. "I've just seen you hassling him since we took off." A middle-aged man 2 rows back said, "Lady, sit down. You're making it worse." The shift in the cabin was subtle but clear. Patricia was losing the crowd. Still, she stood her ground. "Fine. If you won't check it, I will." She reached toward Elias's bag. He moved his hand, not aggressively, but with enough presence to stop her. "Please don't touch my belongings." Adam stepped between them, his voice now edged with authority. "Ma'am, that's enough. Sit. Down." For a long moment, Patricia seemed poised to argue further. Then, realizing she was surrounded by crew and that every passenger's eyes were on her, she huffed out a breath, turned, and stomped back to her seat. She buckled in, muttering under her breath, "When something happens, remember I try to warn you." The air in the cabin felt heavier than before. Marissa exchanged a look with Adam, the kind that meant we need to update the cockpit now. Elias didn't pick his book back up this time. He sat still, eyes on the window, as if reminding himself there was more world out there than the narrow, tense space of row 14. The seatbelt sign chimed again, a soft reminder that the sky outside didn't care about the mess inside. Passengers shifted, traded glances, pretended to read. The hum of the engines felt louder now, like they were flying inside a held breath. Marissa stood at the forward interphone, voice low. "Captain, update." Passenger 12C, Patricia Lane, confronted 14A in the aisle. De-escalated. She seated but still agitated. Crowd awareness elevated. A crackle, then Captain Reed's reply. Calm, clipped. Copy. Keep belts on for now. Document everything. If we get a second disturbance, I'll radio ahead for meet and assist on arrival. Understood, Marissa said, hanging the phone gently, as if sound itself could set the cabin off again. The cabin didn't go fully back to normal. It never really does after a confrontation like that. Instead, a different rhythm took over. Quieter, but with a hum beneath it that wasn't just the engines. Some passengers put headphones back in, their playlists acting like erasers over what just happened. Others cracked open books they hadn't touched since boarding. A few still stole glances toward row 14, as though expecting the scene to restart. Elias Moore sat still, hands resting loosely on the book in his lap. He read the same paragraph twice, not because he didn't understand it, but because it gave him something to anchor to. Out the window, the sun was angling through thin sheets of cloud, laying golden streaks across the wing. Across the aisle in 14C, Rowan tilted his phone screen away from the glare and opened a note app. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard. He thought about typing something, maybe a line to a friend later. "You wouldn't believe what happened on my flight today." But he stopped. Part of him felt that telling it would be feeding the wrong side of the story. 2 rows ahead, Patricia Lane was motionless except for the slight twitch of her jaw. She'd crossed her arms so tightly that her shoulders had risen toward her ears. To anyone passing, she looked like someone deep in thought. But Patricia wasn't reflecting. She was rehearsing. Her mind was already scripting the conversation she'd have once they landed. With security, with the press if necessary. In her version, she was still the one who'd been right all along. In the rear galley, Adam poured coffee into a small paper cup and handed it to Marissa. "She's not letting it go," Adam said in a low voice. Marissa took a sip, nodding. She doesn't have to, as long as she stays in her seat and keeps it quiet. "You think she will?" Marissa glanced toward 12C. "I think she knows we got eyes on her. That might be enough." Adam set his cup down. "Captain still want to meet and assist on arrival?" "Yes," Marissa replied. "Better to have them ready than need them later." Up in the cockpit, Captain Reed listened to Marissa's latest update through his headset. His co-pilot, First Officer Hall, was monitoring instruments but had one ear on the conversation. "Sounds like you handled it well," Hall said. "Marissa and Adam did," Reed replied. "Let's just get everyone on the ground without any more drama." "Agreed." Back in the cabin, a few passengers were whispering across aisles, not in the sharp, fearful way from earlier, more like people comparing notes after a movie. "I think she overreacted," a man in 15D murmured to a woman beside him. "She definitely did," the woman whispered back. He didn't even raise his voice. Rowan overheard, glanced toward Elias, and caught the faintest flicker of a smile on the investigator's face. Not smug, just the kind of weary gratitude that comes when strangers speak up on your behalf. Patricia, meanwhile, had decided she wouldn't speak again for the rest of the flight. Not because she accepted she was wrong, she didn't, but because she was saving her words for people who, in her mind, might actually listen. She kept her gaze fixed forward, but now and then her eyes darted sideways, catching the profile of Elias's face against the window. Each time, she told herself she was still the only one paying attention. Marissa made one more sweep of the cabin. She paused briefly at 14A. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly. Elias looked up from his book. "I'm fine. Just ready to get there." She gave him a small nod, the kind flight attendants reserve for passengers they wish they could protect from more than just turbulence. "Almost there," she said, then continued down the aisle. It was still over an hour to San Francisco, but the confrontation felt like it had happened days ago. That's a strange thing about tension in the air. It warps time. For most of the cabin, the story was already becoming something to tell later. For Patricia, it was unfinished business. For Elias, it was just another room he had to sit in until the door opened. The seatbelt sign chimed on with a soft ding, and Captain Reed's voice came over the intercom, smooth as if nothing unusual had happened during the flight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we begun our initial descent into San Francisco. Weather on the ground is clear and 68 degrees. Please return to your seats, fasten your seatbelts, and stow your tray tables for landing. We'll be on the ground shortly." The cabin stirred in a familiar way. Seats upright, laptops closed, headphones coiled into pockets. But under the normal choreography, there was still a thread of awareness, a shared knowledge that this wasn't quite the same as any other arrival. Marissa leaned toward Adam in the rear galley. "Security confirmed they'll be at the gate," she said quietly. "2 officers." Adam nodded. "They briefed?" "Fully. They know who's who, and they've read the incident log." In 14A, Elias Moore tucked his book into the seat pocket and zipped his bag closed. His movements were steady, deliberate, the same way he'd handled himself the entire flight. He checked the latch on the bag once, then let his hands rest in his lap. Across the aisle, Rowan gave him a nod. "We're almost there," he said quietly. Elias's reply was a small, wry smile. "Almost." 2 rows ahead, Patricia Lane sat perfectly upright, as if good posture would shield her from what was coming. She decided she would speak first when they landed, get her story in before anyone else could. In her mind, the officers waiting at the gate would listen to her. They'd take her concerns seriously. She didn't notice the way Adam and Marissa occasionally glanced toward her, each checking that she stayed in her seat until they were at the gate. The wheels touched down with a soft thud, and the engines reversed with their familiar roar. The plane slowed, taxiing toward the terminal. Captain Reed's voice came again. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to San Francisco. For your safety, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the seatbelt sign is turned off and the aircraft has come to a complete stop at the gate." It wasn't long before the ding came, and passengers reached for bags in the overhead bins. But Adam was already standing in the aisle, his frame positioned between Patricia's row and the forward exit. "Ms. Lane," he said quietly, leaning close enough that nearby passengers couldn't quite hear, "please remain seated until the other passengers have deplaned. Security will be coming to speak with you." Her eyes widened. "Security? For me?" Adam didn't change his tone. "They'll want to hear your account and review the situation. I'm the one who tried to keep this plane safe. Please remain seated, ma'am." Elias stayed in his seat, waiting until most of the passengers had moved forward. He didn't look back toward Patricia. He knew better than to invite one last exchange. Marissa gave him a quiet update as the aisle cleared. "Officers are just outside the door. They'll take her from here. You can head straight to baggage claim if you like." "Thank you," Elias said, "for everything." She offered a small smile. "Safe travels, Mr. Moore." When the last of the passengers had left, 2 uniformed officers boarded. One was tall with calm expression, the other shorter but with a steady gaze. They walked directly to 12C. "Ms. Lane?" the taller officer said. "Yes," Patricia said, straightening. "Finally, I've been waiting to tell you what happened." He held up a hand, not unkindly. "We're aware of the situation. We'll be speaking with you off the aircraft. Please bring your belongings and follow us." Patricia glanced toward Elias, as if expecting one last look of guilt. But he was already moving down the aisle in the opposite direction, his bag over his shoulder. The officers guided Patricia toward the jet bridge. Her voice carried back into the cabin. "You're all making a mistake. I was right. Marissa exhaled quietly as the sound faded down the bridge. Elias stepped into the terminal and felt the weight of the plane fall away. Around him, travelers hurried past, absorbed in their own worlds. People heading to meetings, to vacations, to see family. No one knew what had happened in the air, and that, he thought, was just as well. He moved toward baggage claim, each step putting more distance between him and the accusation he'd just endured. Some rooms you walk out of, others you fly away from. The carousel at baggage claim turned slowly, the rubber slats flapping softly under the fluorescent lights. Elias stood a few steps back, not in a hurry. His bag, a plain weather crayon, emerged after a few rotations. He lifted it off, set on the floor, and checked the small tag hanging from its handle. The tag was worn at the edges, the ink slightly faded. A gift from his daughter years ago. Travel safe, Dad in her looping handwriting. He ran a thumb over the words before tucking it back against the handle. Around him, people hugged, laughed, and shouldered bags towards sliding glass doors that opened to the city beyond. Elias walked out into the late afternoon air. The sky was clear, the breeze cool against his face. For the first time since boarding that flight, he took a deep, unguarded breath. Elsewhere in the terminal, Patricia Lane sat in a small, plain office with 2 security officers. Her arms were crossed, her tone defensive. "I was just trying to protect everyone," she insisted. "You can't tell me that wasn't suspicious." The taller officer kept his voice even. "Ma'am, your concern was noted. It was also investigated and disproved. The passenger you confronted was a federal investigator traveling on official business." Patricia's mouth tightened. "Well, maybe I'd do it again. You can't be too careful." The shorter officer made a note on a clipboard. "You also can't accuse someone without evidence, especially in a way that causes a disturbance. There are consequences for that." Patricia looked away, staring at the wall as if the conversation wasn't hers to be part of. On the curb outside, Elias waited for his ride. Cars pulled up and departed in a constant rhythm. He watched a family greet a man in a suit, a teenager race into the arms of an older brother, a woman lift a small dog out of a carrier to delighted yips. He thought about the cabin, about the way suspicion can spread faster than truth, about the way fear can make strangers believe they see danger in an innocent man's hands. Rowan's words echoed in his head. You shouldn't have to prove you're harmless to read a book. And yet, Elias knew there would be other rooms, other flights, other moments where he would have to do exactly that. His phone buzzed. A message from his daughter. "Made okay?" Elias smiled, typing back. Landed safe. "On my way." He slid the phone into his pocket, picked up his bag, and stepped toward the arriving car. The driver popped the trunk, but Elias hesitated for a moment before handing over the bag. Not because of its contents, just because sometimes, after a flight like that, you want to keep your things close for a while longer. He got in the car, shut the door, and watched the airport recede in the rearview mirror. Somewhere inside that terminal, Patricia was still talking, still explaining, still sure she was right. But the plane was gone, the passengers had dispersed, and the story had already begun to fade for everyone but her. In the quiet of the car, Elias let his mind drift toward the work that had brought him here, the investigation, the meetings ahead. Life didn't stop for one incident, but the memory of it would sit somewhere in the back of his mind, a reminder of how quickly perception can turn into accusation, and how important it is in every room, whether on the ground or in the sky, to let truth speak louder than fear.